Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. Nietzsche and Dostoevsky are our contemporaries, even though both of them are already in grave. Nietzsche died 10 years ago, while Dostoevsky died 30 years ago. And they are ours temporally, like they are ours spiritually. I don't call them ours because they are our spiritual leaders, neither because we are their followers and their students. No, neither because they are most prominent representatives of spiritual tendencies of our epoch. They are both poets and thinkers. Even though no one of them is not a thinker or a poet in a conventional sense of that word. As a poets and thinkers, they are both revolutionary. They made their specific style, specially literary shapes, with specific content. Style, shape, and content of their poetry is revolutionary in both European and Russian literature of modern times. As a thinkers, Nietzsche and Dostoevsky are not metaphysicians but ethicists. Determinants of moral values, makers of the new moral ideals. Ideal of Nietzsche is Überman, while ideal of Dostoevsky is Svet all man. But let's take a closer look at these two ideals. Nietzsche takes his ideal all the way from borders of morality. His ideal is not one good man, but one strong man. In genealogy of morality, to the Latin word bonus, Nietzsche gives meaning combative, warlike. Original meaning of that term originating from the ancient Rome. Good man is generally accepted moral ideal. And the good is the one who obeys to the moral laws, consciously and with lot of scruples. Nietzsche's strong man doesn't mean consciousness or scrupulosity to the generally accepted moral laws, but absolutely hating and ignoring those. And the bigger is the hate of one strong man to the moral laws, more he deserves the title of Überman. More he is closer to the ideal. Three negations Überman has in himself. Negation of morality, negation of people, and negation of himself. Überman negates morality, because morality keeps too many people alive. And they multiplied so much that they became disease of the planet, and planet smells from them. Morality for the Überman is nothing else but defense and protection of too many who don't have their personal strength to defend themselves. Morality is bordering personal power and suppressing personal willful power. Morality is leveling and concession. Morality is leveling power and weakness. Morality wants concessions, bordering self-sacrifice from the power ones for the account of powerless ones. And all that goes against will for power and disturbing birth and development of one Überman. Überman is against morality because the morality is against Überman. Überman negates morality because morality negates him. Überman negates people. People should be overcome and trampled because they are not goal but the means of life on earth. They are bridge that leads to the Überman. They are just big amount, strength, which existential is guaranteed only by morality. That big amount should be stepped over because big amount is not amount that impresses. Amount that impresses is an individual, one powerful and strong individual. The big is the man which in relation to the others shows power, not love. Big is the man who negates all the people around him and under him. Uberman negates and at the end and himself. Zarathustra wants every day to overcome and negates himself, to constantly be arisen from himself. Uberman specially negates himself when he wants to negate man in himself, when he notices weakness in himself. Sympathy for the people, love or care for them, and desire for them and their company. Nietzsche denies ruling morality of love and justice, like harmful to the powerful people, imposed by powerless to the powerful ones. Today's morality wasn't ruling this world all the history. Today's European morality is slave morality, which was born when one better morality was downed and destroyed. Master's morality. This master's morality existed in ancient times. At the noble races in which Nietzsche accounts world of Homer's poems, German Nibelungs, Scandinavian Vikings, and the ancient Rome. Rome on a first place. That morality, master's morality, wasn't forgetting main note of noble races, and this note was blonde bestie, blonde witch, always thirsty for the conquer and victory. Nietzsche wants to say that all those noble races were living more free and more fulfilled life, because their natural instincts were much more stronger and determined than at the poor, rude races. Their natural instincts were not so unimportant in the comparison with the spirit, and the culture of their instincts wasn't so unimportant in comparison with the culture of their spirit. Like it was among the other races in those times. Big and irresistible will to power had the ancient Romans. Will for the battle and victory, for victory over weak, and ruling the weak. Their instincts for mastership the other nations stayed strong and not suppressed through whole their history. They are born like masters and they stay masters through all their history. Reaction against their master's morality occurred in one of the Roman provinces, Judea, with the preach of the slave morality. Slave morality existed at Jewish people in the Old Testament before Christ. In the Rome lived one master race, in the Judea one slave race. With the Jews, slave rebellion started in morality. That rebellion had a goal to weaken and destroy master's morality of noble races. Therefrom, Rome and Judea are two polarities. Spirit of the Rome and Judea are quite the opposite spirits. And battle between Rome and Judea, that's the history of the world till now. Masters were fighting in the name of their power and their natural right, while the slaves were fighting in the name of their piety and their transcendent, supernatural justice. And slaves won against masters. Judea celebrated over the Rome. Last and most important victory of slaves over the masters came with the Christ. Christ just flared up and fanatized the slave rebellion, giving them new food, the Church of Christ, which later organized, had just one goal: destroying Master's morality in the world. That church was heading to the triumph even though Romans were desperately fighting against them. That, by Nietzsche, was a battle of the nobles with the people, or a slaves, or a herd. Little and powerless people organize against big and powerful. With their number and their fanatism, the first ones won, and on the place of the imperial Rome came one plebeian Rome. On the place of the sword, which symbolized all morality, came olive branch. And the defeat of the master's morality was not anymore just a Roman's defeat. It spread all over the world. Aryan nations of still wild Europe, in the woods by the Rhine and Danube, who were feeding the blonde witch in themselves with their master's morality, finally let down their bloody weapons faced with the cross, and accepted slave morality, and started to tame their blonde witch. Whole Europe, and afterwards the whole world, failed on the knees faced with the cross, and stepped into the conspiracy against Master's morality. And that is how ended the scariest battle in history of the world. Battle for the supremacy of moralities, Master's morality and slave morality. And people won against their masters and established their morality. Meaning of the words good and evil changed in a whole world. Word good that used to mean power today means weakness. Man who was magnificent bloody beast before became one tame domestic animal. A lion is tamed and converted to a lamb. Virtue of vengeance transformed into its contrast, into the virtue of non-vengeance. Warm man who crawls, who forgives, who is not looking for vengeance, who sacrifices for the others, who abstains, who suffers. That man is presented today like a goal of the history. Today's life of manhood and whole today's culture, primarily European culture, is intending today more and more to that goal and to realize that goal in a history. Whole contemporary European culture is intending today to make a man better. And no doubt man becomes better, thinks Nietzsche. And that is a problem of Europe. Because better in contemporary European meaning means more kind-hearted, more clever, more refined, more comfortable, more indifferent, more Chinese, more Christian. Nietzsche is desperate because he sees that man is becoming better in that meaning, and in his desperation he attacks furiously all those who are accepting and supporting current state of things. Especially he attacks Christian church like an organization of plebeian morality par excellence. He attacks English philosophers and moralists who were justifying plebeianism in the history and morality. Berkeley and Spencer he attacks more than the others, because more than the others they were lawyers of plebeianism. Nietzsche attacks in contemporary democracy and socialism as a monster who is quasi-opponent of Christian church. But in reality, socialism goes even further than the Christian church in destroying master's morality and in plebeianing and vulgarizing the world. Christian church had at least one man with a master morality, Pope Borgia, who stepped over all Christian morality. Democracy had not one man like that. Democracy, it means noise and rebellion against master's morality. Slave rebellion. First slave rebellion occurred in Judea in old times. Second in France in times of revolution. Never on the earth was more jubiling or more cheerful noise than in the times of French Revolution. Last political nobility felt down, and in all that jubile and cheering, something happened so strange and unexpected, incarnated with such a shine, and stepped to the eyes and the minds of the manhood. That was Napoleon, synthesis of a non-man and Uberman. Napoleon is the only man in the modern history who Nietzsche can look without scorn and disgust. Napoleon is the only bird of prey among the lambs. And Nietzsche is on the side of birds of prey against lambs. He thinks that it should not be counted for bad that lambs are mad at the birds of prey, like it should not be counted for bad that the birds of prey are taking the lambs. Lambs have a right to say, these birds of prey are evil, and if somebody is more a bird, if somebody is more a lamb than a bird of prey, he's better. Birds of prey can only answer, we are not mad at those lambs. We like them. There is nothing so tasty as one soft lamb. Conclusion: from the power cannot be expected to be weakness. From weakness it cannot be expected to be a power. Everybody has to stay himself. Today's man is a weakness, and his morality is just protection of weakness. We are tired of man, Nietzsche says in his genealogy of morality. And later in the Zarathustra, he tries to make one new type, or let's say, one new organism, a rising over man and over morality. But I was wrong when I said that Napoleon was the only one in the modern history who Nietzsche can look without scorn or disgust. There was one more man who Nietzsche could look at with respect and admiration, Dostoevsky. Nietzsche for himself, he says that he's für Dostoevsky schmarrnt. In the letter to Hippolytena, Nietzsche says his judgment about Paul Bourget and says that spirit of Dostoevsky don't give a rest to this Parisian romancier. In the letter to Georges Brandes, that's how he says about Dostoevsky. I absolutely believe your words about Dostoevsky. Me, from the other side, I respect him like a most precious psychological material that I know. And I'm personally very grateful to him, even though he is so contrary to my lowest instincts. Dostoevsky, who described himself as an ex-convict in the letter to the Tsar Alexander II. Dostoevsky, who's been born in the poor man's hospital, who was taken to a shafot, who was epileptic, in chains, in hunger together with his family. Dostoevsky, to whom whole Moscow was applauding and to whom whole St. Petersburg was in a funeral. He was biggest modern apostle of morality, which Nietzsche called slave morality, and maker of one new type of morality. Svet all man. Dostoevsky called Pushkin all man, even though that title is more suitable for him. Powerful genius of Dostoevsky covered much more human souls than Pushkin. Great men are either astonishingly one-sided or astonishingly versatile. In the other words, great men are either thin and tall, like obelisk, or wide and deep, like a sea. Thin and tall was Nietzsche, and wide and deep was Dostoevsky. Like a Russian land, that is how wide is Dostoevsky's soul. Or better, like a whole planet. There is no man on earth who can't find himself in the works of Dostoevsky. And for sure, that even Nietzsche himself was reflected in this deep blue sea. Otherwise, he could not have such a respect to this Russian Shakespeare, how one German writer called Dostoevsky. To the spirit of Dostoevsky, familiar was Nietzsche's ideal and before Zarathustra. Dostoevsky pictured one Uberman in the character of Raskolnikov in the novel Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov constantly has a Napoleon in his eyes, and he's living assured that the great man everything is permitted, never mind the morality. But Raskolnikov is a product of Dostoevsky, and like that he couldn't stay one-sided Uberman like was Napoleon, his ideal. Because Napoleon never repented for spilled blood, but Raskolnikov repented. He left his bloody ex and gone to the jail, to Siberia, with the gospel in his hands and repent in his soul. In the soul of Napoleon and the soul of Zarathustra, there was no split. But Raskolnikov got his name because he split, divided soul. His soul don't participate anywhere full, but just with one part. One part in the crime, other part in repentance. Dostoevsky didn't want to make one Uberman, but to analyze and picture real people and make distinction between good and the bad at them. Dostoevsky was looking for ideal in the real, for a goal in the mud, for a great in the scorn. Bielinski said about young Dostoevsky's work, Miserable People, honor and fame to this young poet, which muse kisses the people from the basement and speaks about them to those who are living in a golden palace. Look, those are also people, your brothers. Those miserable people, Makaria, Devushkin and Varenka, Zarathustra would step them over like a mud, because he couldn't find the force and the power and the warlike instincts and the blonde witch in them. But Dostoevsky dug over the mud which was covering those miserable people. He twisted their soul and showed it to the light. He developed all the folds of their souls. He measured all the silent and hidden vibrations, and the world was mesmerized by such a shine under such a mud. And that's how Dostoevsky, like a great wizard, showed the world gold in the mud, and otherwise mud in the gold. World was holding a Makariy, Devushkin, Evarenka for a mud. But Dostoevsky opened the world's eyes that they can see that in that mud there is also gold. And the world was holding Lord Beaconsfield for one golden man, which was shining the people's eyes with his status and with his fine intelligence and Slavonic nobility. But Dostoevsky surprised the world one day when he published in his diary, Lord Beaconsfield is one terrible piccola bestia, which scams nations for his own sake. Chef d'oeuvre of Lord Beaconsfield is, by Dostoevsky, to make a slaughterhouse in Bulgaria. Eastern question would be easily solved if this piccola bestia wouldn't bother with his intrigues, says Dostoevsky. Lord Beaconsfield is not touched by the tears and the suffering of Balkan nations tortured by Turks. In the Moscow there was a lot of Balkan refugees, and one 8-year-old girl painfully remembered how the Circassians were peeling the skin of her father alive. "Oh civilization, oh Europe," yelling Dostoevsky, "let it be damned civilization if for its existentiation is necessary to peel the skin of a live man. Can man make a happiness of the misery of the other man?" asking Dostoevsky, and continue, "How can it be that happiness founded on the other man's misery? Think about it. Imagine that you are making building of human destiny with one final goal to make people happy and give them a peace and rest. And imagine for that goal you need to torture one whole human being, not some special or prominent human being, not Shakespeare, but just one old man. And just he should be humiliated, dishonored, and tortured. And on his tears your building should be built. Do you accept to be architect of that building by those conditions?" Nietzsche's Uberman would just mock this question, first because he would never build a building of human happiness, but just building of his own happiness. And in that building, he is ready to put every brick that is necessary, no matter if that brick is wet by the tears or the blood of one old man or many humans, one whole human herd on earth. But Dostoevsky answers no. In his eyes, every human being on earth has a right for existence. And because of that, he says, we are all good people. We just look bad to each other because we don't know each other good. Honesty and sincerity of our society is not doubtful at all, and it can be seen so clear. That's what Dostoevsky said about Russian society in the times when most Russian writers like Herzen and Turgenev were taught about Russian society as one decaying corpse, but he saw what others couldn't see. His assessment and judgment wasn't backed up by the prejudice or cold surgical indifference, but with love. He knew in advance that he will find two abysses in every man's soul, like in soul of Karamazov's, because he was able to get in anybody's soul like in his own. And he was going just to measure those two abysses, abyss of noble and abyss of disgust, and to set their size. We are afraid of people that are surrounding us. But if we could get closer to them, we would meet them. We wouldn't be afraid. To meet means to forgive. Slavenophiles and Westernophiles couldn't stand each other like two nations in a war. But Dostoevsky knew them both and knew how much goodness is in them. Such a mind, such a high ideal, such a readiness for human activity and self-immolation. But why can't they love each other, or all those who are arguing? Wondering Dostoevsky. But Slavenophiles and Westernophiles could not have a love for each other because of their extremely and wrong assessment of values of Europe and the Russian. Slavanophiles denied all values of Western culture and denied West completely, while they were glorifying Russian people. And on the other side, Westernophiles were constantly glorifying West and mocking Russian people like one dark and half barbaric mass. Slavanophiles of Moscow were wearing village people costumes, while Knyaz Gagarin, old Russian nobleman, became so pro-European and anti-Russian that he even accepted Catholicism and became a Jesuit. Dostoevsky was discussed both by the glorification of Russia and the glorification of West. Why they are glorifying Russian people when Russian people don't glorify themselves, but repents and calms down, aware of his insufficiency? Never, even the biggest scoundrel of the Russian people never said, like that should be acted like I act, but always citing believed that his acting is bad and there is always something better than him and his acts, says Dostoevsky. Westernophiles glorified West. Why? When the most prominent man there is word Beaconsfield, in the name of whose skins are peeling off alive people. And Dostoevsky was trying to separate those two abysses at West and the Russian. Same like he separated two abysses at man's soul. On the West there is so much culture but not so much Christianity and brotherhood spirit. In Russia there is so much Christianity but not so much of culture. West is big with the science and small with the faith. And the Russia is big with the faith and small with the science. Russian nation see his historical task in the serving Christ and through the Christ serving the whole humanity. Wests want to become a master over the world. And if Nietzsche could see what Dostoevsky saw, he would be satisfied. But Nietzsche saw at Western Europe same that Dostoevsky saw at Russia. Calming down, appeasement, and a serving the Christ. Science and the craftness we could accept from the Europe, but not the faith, because West just don't have it. Speaking Dostoevsky, Western Christianity transformed into mechanization a violent institution who wants to be a master, not a servant. Catholicism, instead of arising people to the God, down the God to the earth. Protestantism doesn't have nothing positive. His meaning is protest. Negation. If suddenly Catholicism disappears, Protestantism would also disappear, because there will be no cause for the protest. But Catholicism won't disappear, because he is renewing things Dostoevsky through the Western socialism. Socialism, this atheist Catholicism, goes into the battle with the maxim Fraternité ou mort, brotherhood or the death. Socialism with his atheism and egoism gonna finish destruction of the West, started by the Roman Catholicism. On the West, speak Dostoevsky, there is not any more Christianity, but there are still many Christians, and they will never disappear. And in the Christians there, Dostoevsky counts Schiller, Dickens, and George Sand. She was one of the most completely testifiers of Christ, but unaware of that, says he. But they don't have any influence on the West. They are more rated in Russia than the West. Bad future predicts Dostoevsky to the West. There goes the fourth class, knocking and breaking the doors if they are not open. The fourth class doesn't want past ideals. He denies all existing laws. He doesn't need compromises and concessions. You ain't gonna save the building with the rackets. Concessions just gonna make him more flared. He wants everything. Something gonna happen that no one expects. All those parliamentarism, civil theories, banks, science, Jews, all that gonna fall into the abyss. Except maybe the Jews who would maybe find a way even then. Everything is closed at the doors. You are laughing. Blessed are those who are laughing, and me, how can I be happy? Asking Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky didn't say that from the hate, but from the love for the Europe. We all like Europe. In Europe is whole Japhet's tribe, and our idea, says Dostoevsky, is uniting whole nations of that tribe and more to the sim and a ham. West is our second homeland. Russian on a West is like a guest in his house. European nations look at Russians with a fear. That fear has several reasons. There are more than 100 million Russians. And Russians know all Western ideals. Russians know all languages of West. Russians know all past of the West and their tendencies, and West doesn't know anything about Russia. Therefrom is European fear. Dostoevsky perfectly unstrengthened that fear. He thinks that West in his fall will only find salvation in the Russian. When the fourth class arises, when the slave rebellion happens, Nietzsche would say, then the waves just gonna broke on our coast, says Dostoevsky. Because then it would be clearly how much is our national patriotism different than European. Those Western nations just don't know how much we love them, shouts Dostoevsky. When the West breaks down, then the Slavs will have to say new word to the whole world. That new word will be about sake of whole world, not just for the sake of Slavs. That word will be about uniting all nations, about general harmony and final brothers' agreement of all tribes by the Christ's gospel law. That uniting will not be political, neither economical, but one brotherhood founded on love. Be brothers, says he in his prophecy on a hill, but not from the economical reasons, but from the joy of the fullness of the life, from the fullness of the life. When the West breaks down, then with the Slavic initiative, one big human brotherhood will be born, one all manhood. Then whole world will be like one man, like one all man, because whole world will live with one soul and one love, and every human will be one all man in himself, because he will have big all world, all human soul, and harmony of that soul. When that happens, one political and economical brotherhood will be made also, but without the first one, the second one will be just a lie masked under the name of the truth. In this moment, only Slav is capable to be all man, because Slav knows two worlds, Western and Slavic. All Slavic history till now was meeting the West, meeting and forgiving the Western ideals. Dostoevsky tells, "We met the West and forgive him his narrow ideals." Even the widest ideal of Western is narrow for the Slavic soul. In Europe, they are holding almost all Russians for the nihilists, for the destroyers of all that wasn't they who were building. That's a fact that Dostoevsky doesn't deny. But he explains that fact. Russians are negating Western civilization because they don't like it. But they doesn't destroy like Huns and Tatars just for the sake of the destroying or for their own sake. But because something says Dostoevsky that even we don't know what it is. Russians who are destroyers in the West are not destroyers in Russia. Belinsky, who was European socialist, was a great patriot in Russia. Russians are looking at the Europeans as a past, and they see themselves as a future. Ivan Karamazov says to his brother Alexei, "I wanna travel to the Europe, Alyosha, and I know that I will see only graveyards, but the most lovely graveyard. Russian nation is a sinful and dark, and Dostoevsky saw it better than any other great Russian. But Russian nation has one force which he lives. That force is Christ. Christianity on the West became one dark power, which is disturbing life, while Christianity in Russia is one lively force with whom people are living. In the people's Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, there is not much of logic, but there is so much love, self-sacrifice. But is the world living with logic? No, but with love before logic. To love life before logic. That's the philosophy of Alexei Karamazov, which he tells to his atheist brother Ivan. To love people before the logic. That's important teaching of Orthodox Christianity. Failures of the heart are much worse than failures of the mind, thinks Dostoevsky. Indeed, history shows that human heart can accomplish a much more perfection than the human mind, because Earth has seen much more examples of perfect love, but not one example of perfect mind. Perfect love means that somebody is serving his fellows and give his life for them. In serving Christ, speaks Dostoevsky, or in the other words, in serving manhood, Russian nation see his historical task, not ruling the world, but serving the world. But serving the Christ or serving the manhood means suffering. Suffering. Suffering is therefrom a role of the Russian nation in the history. Suffering in the intention for accomplishing all world uniting and brotherhood. Dostoevsky predicts with his prophetically instinct that Russians and all Slavs will have so much to suffer, and suffering is their destiny. That's why he's indicating suffering as the fatal path for us Slavs. Dostoevsky shows the way and the joy of suffering. Suffering is needed because there is a joy in it. That's the one of the main points of Dostoevsky's philosophy. This is my testament, speaks old Zosima to Alexei Karamazov. Seek for a joy in a suffering. Of course, not in a pointless suffering, but in a suffering for a good of all people. We are all guilty for everything. In that way, we also need to suffer for everyone. Last word of old man Zosima are, you know, my dear ones, that every one of you is guilty for everything, and every one for every man on earth, for all people. That's the essence of teaching of this, with no doubt, most extraordinary and most genuine man that Russia ever gave. Not just for herself, but for the whole world, because Dostoevsky was known by a whole educated world and the ownership of whole world. Nietzsche met him but didn't opposing him, even though he knew that Dostoevsky is most powerful representative of those against whom Nietzsche was calling a crusade war. If Dostoevsky was alive in the times of Zarathustra, he would become a biggest and most passionate opponent of Nietzsche. Such a pity that Dostoevsky wasn't alive back then. In his critique of the Uberman, he would much better develop his own ideal of all men. But such a pity also that we didn't have discussion between those two men, in which all tendencies of their and our times are condensed. We missed one titanic battle which world had never seen, or which world is looking at every day but doesn't see. Hey, look, Dostoevsky and Nietzsche are two polarized worlds. In them we can see Judea and the wrong, Christianity and paganism, people and the despot, fate and the faithless, hope and desperation, Christ and Antichrist. Uberman is like one big stone statue, let's say like Neron's statue that was standing in the Roman Colosseum. All man is like one little museum of statues and statuettes, in group or alone. Or Uberman is like one big tree or one big field, and all man is like a wood of many trees, intertwined and connected with branches, veins, or at least with shadows. Uberman denies God, denies morality, denies society. All man accepts God, accepts morality, and accepts society. Uberman is looking for a meaning of a manhood in himself. All man found his meaning in manhood. Uberman is one monad, huge by size. All man is one organization of many small monads. Uberman is against every organization because every organization wants some concessions of personal rights. Uberman is also against culture because there is no culture without organization. And even all those old noble nations that Nietzsche liked so much were in beginning organized and cultural at some level. In the basics of those first organizations and cultures, there was principle. Sacrificing your personality to the one bigger organization, family, tribe, or nation. That wasn't a human, but one all-man principle. On the other side, modern nations of Europe, for whom Nietzsche thinks that are weak and soft because of the Christianity. They are constantly living in a relation of master's morality, full of desire for conquering and victory, overwhelmed with weapons and war plans. In his early works, Nietzsche thought that he found his ideal in all noble races. But later, when he was writing Zarathustra, he already had a different thoughts. Now it was clear to him that ideal that he had was never possible in the history, in society, in the culture. And that's why he erased his ideal from those and alone it. Zarathustra is his most consistent work. Nietzsche doesn't speak anymore about noble nations or noble races, but just about one noble man. Rousseau and Tolstoy wanted to get man back to the nature in order to make him a lamb. But Nietzsche wanted to get man back to nature in order to make him a bird of prey, an anti-Christian. Rousseau and Tolstoy missed their goals, but Nietzsche didn't. Dostoevsky didn't want to get man back to his primitive, uncultural stadium. What wanted Rousseau, Tolstoy, and Nietzsche? Dostoevsky believed that ideal of all men can be accomplished by going further from the point of stagnation, going through the culture, not around the culture, with the culture and the suffering, or just suffering, because the basics of the culture are suffering. That's the way to the Dostoevsky's all man. Even though this ideal doesn't have enough good philosophical backup, and this ideal is even a little bit unlikable, but he is still one ideal that people like cultural community can have. But if everyone would have only this ideal, then there will be no struggle between nations, there will be no struggle between people, and there will be no struggle in the soul of one man. Who knows? Would life on earth still exist? Same like that, if everyone would have a Nietzsche's ideal, then they would ruthlessly kill each other. And then also there would be a peace and silence in the earth, because there would be no people on the earth. Who knows, would then still be life on the earth. But people usually go the middle way and mixing the ideals. People like Nietzsche because he supports their egoism, but they are ashamed of following his ideal to the end. People like Dostoevsky because he doesn't isolate them, and people are always afraid of loneliness. Dostoevsky satisfies their social instincts and ties them in one big chain of manhood, like one ring. But people are also afraid to follow his ideal till the end. Overman and all men are always making split in a human soul, in a society. If Nietzsche and Dostoevsky would join in one man, that man would be called Raskolnikov. And there is a lot of Raskolnikovs among people, but there is a little bit of those consistent to the Nietzsche or to the Dostoevsky. It's easier and more comfortable not to be consistent. But who wants to be consistent? He got to choose Nietzsche or Dostoevsky. Both Nietzsche and Dostoevsky had a Slavic blood. But Nietzsche became apostle of West, Dostoevsky became apostle of the Slavs. If tomorrow war between Russia and the West happens, West would fight in the name of the Nietzsche, in the name of his egoism, and Russia would fight in the name of Dostoevsky, in the name of all human uniting and the brotherhood. Those two sick men, Nietzsche mentally sick and Dostoevsky epileptic, and they are ruling the souls of the whole cultural world today. They become symbols and a flag to the people. They are exhausting whole genius of modern Europe. These two forces, who were more theoretical before, are now starting to get more practical, applied in a real life. Nietzsche and Dostoevsky are not anymore just theoretical forces, like Spinoza and Kant, but two alive forces with whom world lives. Battle in the name of the Nietzsche and Dostoevsky started little by little, but crucial, terrible fight still has to start. Spirit of the Uberman and spirit of all men will be leading the armies. One new slave rebellion gonna happen. And most predictably their new victory. That would be a second great victory of Christianity in history. Gentlemen, respect Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. Respect one as a prophet of a West and other as a prophet of a East. Respect them because of their genius and because of their nobleman honesty and courage. Respect them both, but in the moment of decision, stay with Dostoevsky. Holy Nikolaj Velimirović, Episcop of Žiča and Ohrid. Translated by George Dragutinović.